Welcome. Welcome back if you're a regular, and welcome if you are new. I'm Anita, the vegan mindset coach, and I created Unstoppable Vegans to help us all survive and thrive in a non-vegan world while also being effective advocates for animals and for ourselves. I do these trainings weekly inside our Facebook community right here, and as of recently also share the recordings to YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, do drop your comments and your questions below the video. If you're watching on YouTube, commenting is turned off, but you will find all the ways to contact me on my channel. So, let's get started. In this 6-week series, I'm talking about carnism. And carnism is the dominant oppressive system and ideology which says it's okay to eat, use, and exploit certain species of animals. Now, carnism is propped up by a set of inaccurate and biased beliefs, also known as cognitive distortions, and that's what I'll be referring to them going forward. It's these distortions embedded in almost every person's mind that keeps the system of carnism strong. When we help people to recognize these distortions, we weaken carnism. In the last video, I shared my approach to weakening the first cognitive distortion of carnism, which is denial. Now, when we weaken the distortion of denial, people realize that animal exploitation and suffering are in fact real and widespread. They stop denying and minimizing it. And that's a really great start. But do they actually go vegan? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, most people then go on to reach for the next cognitive distortion in their toolkit, and that one is justification. And that happens because when we can't deny that we are doing something that we're not proud of, but we're also not ready to stop doing it, or we don't know if we can even stop doing it, then we do feel forced to justify it. Now, have you ever done something that you didn't feel great about? Like, I bet you have. I know I certainly have. So maybe you lied, or you stole something, or you lost your temper with someone. And even though you felt bad about it and you wished you hadn't actually done it, when you were called out over it, you felt compelled to defend it. Am I right? That's certainly been my experience. So you might have said something like, "I'm sorry for losing my temper, but you made me so mad." So there's that justification. And so similarly, non-vegans will often say, "Well, of course I don't want animals to suffer, but I need meat to be healthy." Justification. So here's the thing about us humans. Whenever we are doing something, anything, we feel compelled to justify it, whether we actually agree with the action or not. In the process of justifying it, we convince ourselves that it's the right thing to do. Attitude follows behavior. Now, carnism trains people to desire and consume animal products, and thereby it also manipulates them into justifying that consumption. As vegans, we want to break through carnistic justifications, don't we? But when almost everyone in the world is in agreement with those justifications, including the health system, the education system, most of the authority figures in society, how on earth do we actually break through that? Now, we know that arguing and debating with people doesn't work because they just get more defensive. And even if we're really clever and we win the argument, we still lose the person. And that's because people don't change when they lose an argument. They just wish they'd argued better, and often they just resent the person who won, right? So people change when awareness dawns for them from within. Which leaves us where? What's the best strategy then? If giving them information, debating with them, arguing with them isn't going to be the answer. So the very, very simple solution is to ask them questions, right? They can be very simple questions, but powerful questions that prompt them to reflect on what they truly know versus what they have assumed to be true, right? The facts versus what they have simply accepted as the truth because everyone else around them has to. We want to ask questions that clarify people's thinking. So let's look at what those questions look like in relation to the myths that help people justify eating animals. Justification for carnism is underpinned by 3 myths that people reach for when they can no longer use denial as a defense. Okay, so these 3 myths are that it is normal, natural, and necessary to eat and use animals. Let's take each of these in turn, and I'll show you how simple it is to dismantle them. Okay, let's start with the myth of normal. Now, on the face value of it, normal happens to actually be true, right? It's hard to argue with the fact that it is in fact normal to eat and use animals, because if we go by the dictionary definition of normal, that is as it is used in common language, not the statistical term, but commonly normal simply means things that are ordinary and happen most of the time, which means, things that are common in our experience. So by this definition, eating and using animals is normal. But the subconscious link that people are making is that normal equals desirable and good. So it's really great to start by asking them, what do you mean by normal? Now, the answer to this is almost always, everybody does it. Now, if they say everybody, that's our first opportunity to create some awareness for them, right? Because obviously we know that not everybody does it. Now, they've just made a generalization. So I simply like to repeat that statement back to them as a question, and I will say, everybody does it? Now, of course, once they're forced to think about it, they realize it's not true. So they will usually correct that to a statement like, well, most people do it. Okay? Now, it might seem like me just being really nitpicky, but there's actually a very important distinction there, because when they change from everybody does it to most people do it, it is actually an acknowledgement on their part that consuming animals is a choice. If not everybody does it, then it cannot be necessary. That's a really important little distinction, and it actually already helps to address the myth of necessary a little bit in advance, and we'll get to that one later. But to properly bust the myth of normal, what we really want to do is to reveal that hidden equation in people's minds, which says that normal equals good. And we do that with asking more questions. So let's get into those questions. So a really powerful question that I like to ask, and it's such a simple one, is, does something being normal automatically make it good, moral, ethical, or right? Now, the answer to that is inevitably no, of course it doesn't. But, some people might get stuck thinking about that. Some people might be thinking about everything that they consider to be normal, and they just might not be able to think of anything among those that they don't consider to be good or right. Okay, so they might choose to argue the point. And if they do, we can use a very specific example to help them get to clarity and to realize that, in fact, no, normal does not mean good. And a really safe example to use is one from human history, one that I have yet to come across a person who agrees that this was a good thing. Okay, so I will say to them, there have been times in human history when it was normal to treat people of other races the way that we treat non-human animals now. Right? That means, to hunt them, enslave them, make them work for us for free, control their movements and their reproduction, and also take their babies away by force. Right? That's not such a distant memory for many of us. Stolen generations are still, living folks within our lifetime right now. So this was all normal at one time. Now, did it make it morally right and justifiable? Well, the answer is always, always no. Nobody would ever, ever say it's justifiable. So we can then very simply round off this set of questions by saying, so is doing these things to non-human animals moral and ethical just because it is normal right now? And most people are going to say no. And it is as simple as that. Simple as that we have dismantled that myth that normal is acceptable, that normal is good. This is where we get to give the person we're talking to permission to stop participating in what is normal, right? In something that is normal, but actually in conflict with their values as good people who don't want to hurt animals. At this point, we can simply point out to them that throughout human history, terrible things have been normalized, like slavery, and that it has always required a minority of people who are not willing to accept the unjust status quo to speak up and make others aware that they have a choice. And when people start making different choices, what is normal changes for the better. So this is our invitation for them to join us. Okay, it'd be great if most people went vegan at this point. That'd be just so amazing. Unfortunately, there are more justifications left. So often they'll scrabble for the next one. It's like, okay, normal is no longer acceptable, right? So, but it's natural, right? Nature intended for us to eat and use animals. And again, the inaccurate thinking here is that natural equals good. And the reality is that most people haven't thought through what natural actually means. So again, it's a really great start to just ask them to clarify what they mean. So what does natural mean to you? And typical answers to this are going to be, well, our ancestors ate meat and that's how we evolved. Evolved. And that's nature, right? Or we're omnivores, not herbivores. They're referring to biology there, right? We're omnivores, therefore we're supposed to eat meat. Or they might say, well, humans are the top of the food chain, so we're supposed to eat everything else beneath. So now, if you happen to have the relevant knowledge of human biology and evolutionary history, you can easily unpick and dismantle each of those statements quite quickly. You don't need to have that knowledge, right? Right? If you're not an expert, you can simply bring the conversation back to right here and right now, because we're not talking in the evolutionary past, we're talking modern times. So we can very simply say to the person, if you today, right now, found yourself out in nature with just the weapons that nature has given you, that you're physically equipped with, which is your teeth and your hands, would you be able to catch, kill, and eat a cow or a pig? Because they're usually the animals that people are eating, maybe chickens, right? So a few jokers in this case might just say, yes, okay. They're just being facetious, obviously. But, some of them will insist. So we can now get them to just clarify that by getting specific. So first of all, we can simply say, do you really mean that? Like, seriously? Most people, don't, and they might admit that. But if they insist, right, we can then ask them to talk through how they would do that. Just exactly how would you do that, right? How would you run down and catch a cow or a pig? Are they fast enough, strong enough to catch live prey? Can their teeth tear through fur and skin? Is the idea of tearing a living animal apart with their teeth actually appealing to them? And can they eat the bones, the guts, the fur and all, just like all the other animals out there that hunt and kill to eat, right? Because that's the way that nature intended, right? It's how animals in nature eat each other. Then we can contrast this with the way most people actually do get their meat, which is through the supermarket, right? So a simple question is, okay, what is natural about factory farms, slaughterhouses, supermarkets, refrigeration, plastic packaging? What's natural about stoves and ovens and pots and pans and spices and sauces to make meat edible? Now, people are going to fairly quickly acknowledge that those things are not nature. They're technology. They're things that we have developed. Nature didn't create those things. It didn't give them to us. So, following on from there, we can simply ask, so does nature still seem like a good justification for humans eating other animals? No, it's clearly not. So, again, we've busted another myth. Okay, which is of course why at this point most people will flip to the next myth, which is that it's necessary, right? Okay, so just because it's normal, it's not acceptable. It's probably actually no longer very natural because of the artificial way that we do it, but it is still necessary, right? All of this technology we've employed to raise and kill animals is because we need to be eating animals. Okay, so the necessity myth comes in two forms. One is straight up, we need to eat animal products to be healthy, right? They just make animal products a food category that is essential, or they will go to nutrients. They will say, well, we need protein, or usually it's protein, but they might say iron or B12 or some other nutrient that they believe can only be obtained from animals. So that's the unspoken assumption, right? That we can only get these things from animal products. We need to eat animal products to be healthy is simply wrong. We know that we do not need them. We need nutrients, not specific animal products. We also know that we can get most of the nutrients we need from plants, and the ones that we need to supplement, because they will often come at us with, but vegans need to supplement, we know that the ones we need to supplement also need to be supplemented for meat eaters. They just don't realize that animal products come pre-supplemented. Right? Either they have been fortified or the animals themselves have been fed those supplements. So it's really tempting just to tell them this because we as vegans all know these as facts, right? But again, our facts tend to just bounce off those carnistic defense shields. So asking them questions is going to be much more effective. So if they say that eating animals is necessary, a simple question to ask them is, what leads you to believe that? Now, it's amazing how that will stop people in their tracks, right? In my experience, the best they can come out with usually is, well, it's just a fact. And then all I have to say is it? And then, that they really start to question themselves pretty quickly. All right, now, if they're talking about nutrients, the question becomes, what leads you to believe that we need to eat animals to get essential nutrients? Okay, between them, these two questions challenge their beliefs in a way that they can hear without getting defensive. It prompts them to search their own mind and their experience for evidence to support what they said. So that's the whole point. They offered a statement like it was simply the truth, like it was simply a fact that could not be disputed, and now we're just asking them to back that up. And they very quickly realize that they can't. So sometimes people are stumped just at this point and they realize that they never had the solid evidence to support these claims. Now, sometimes they will refer to their doctor, right, having told them to eat meat, which is harder to counter because a doctor is an authority figure for people and a supposed health expert. But we can still gently test this by asking, well, what if your doctor was wrong? When so many other doctors disagree with that. Okay, we can do that. Hey, it's worth a try to open them up to the possibility that maybe their doctor's not infallible. But another approach might be an alternative question which takes it away from the onus of proof, but in flipping it over to what they would need to see from us. So what would you need to see in order to believe that humans can, in fact, thrive without eating animals? Right, so this question then invites them to consider that their belief could be proven wrong with the appropriate evidence from us. Okay, so as a bonus here, when they give an answer to this question, we find out exactly what evidence we need to give them, so we don't need to information dump on them everything that we can possibly think of, which is usually too much and often not relevant. And in addition to that, because they have actually said, this is what I would need to know, they have actually invited that specific information, which means they've given a little micro consent to actually considering it when we do provide it. Okay, so folks, those are the three myths of justification, right? So normal, natural, and necessary, and just 2 or 3 very simple questions for each that dismantle each of those myths. Now, what I want to offer you in summary of that is questions rather than facts and arguments are what create awareness for people and openness to new information. And there are 2 strategies if you don't want to have to memorize, these questions, and you shouldn't have to memorize questions, but 2 simple strategies for formulating these powerful questions is, one, simply to get them to define or clarify what they mean when they make a statement that they simply assume to be truth. So when they say something like normal, natural, or necessary, just get them to clarify exactly what they mean by that. Okay? Then get them to get really specific in describing what it is that they are referring to. Like, okay, if you feel that you're a natural apex predator and you were designed to hunt and kill live prey, describe to me exactly how you're going to do that. Okay, so these 2 types of questions very quickly reveal people's knowledge gaps to us and to themselves, so that we know what information they need from us, but also they start to become aware of their own cognitive distortions. They start to realize that there are these inaccurate beliefs that have been instilled in them, and they start to question them, okay? And that's exactly what we want. So if you find yourself hearing these myths being used to defend carnism, I invite you to have a go at asking these kinds of powerful questions. If you want, make a note of the questions I shared today, so next time you can dismantle those myths and get people thinking for themselves. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like and subscribe to be notified about the next video. And if you want to comment or ask questions, feel free to join Unstoppable Vegans on Facebook or contact me via the links on my channel. Next week, I will tackle the 3rd cognitive distortion of carnism, which is othering and victim blaming. And I'm looking forward to dismantling that one with you too.